Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on consumer horticulture and climate change. We've got a great presentation plan for you to explore consumer horticulture and how this massive industry really plays a role in climate change and how we can have a positive impact in the future. Today's presenters include myself, Mason Day. I am the co-vice chair of the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, and in my professional life, I am the head of community and support for J.R. Peters Incorporated. We design, manufacture, and distribute fertilizers for home and commercial use. And in my role on Niche, I have served to represent the commercial community within the consumer horticulture industry for the last several years. Next up, we have Janet Harton. Janet is the Southern California area environmental horticulture advisor with University of California Cooperative Extension. Janet's region includes San Bernardino County, the largest county in the United States, in addition to Riverside and Los Angeles counties. Janet will be sharing her research and the intersection of trees and climate change. Next up is Natalie Baumgartner. On the other side of the nation, we have Dr. Natalie Baumgartner, University of Tennessee Residential and Consumer Horticulture Extension Specialist. In her position, Natalie has oversight of the Extension Master Gardener program in Tennessee. She also holds national appointments with the Extension Master Gardener program, and we'll be sharing the power and impact of that network. And wrapping us up today will be Ellen Bowski. Dr. Ellen Bowski is the chair of the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. And in addition to her important role with Niche, Ellen is the Senior Public Service Associate for the Georgia Center for Urban Agriculture at the University of Georgia. Ellen's work leads cross-functional collaborations, bringing together industry, academia, and the public to advance the consumer horticulture industry. So, consumer horticulture industry. What is consumer horticulture? It's one of the questions that we get most often. And the answer is pretty simple. We are all consumer horticulture. If you've ever enjoyed a park, have you planted anything in your yard? Do you seek out a shade tree? Consumer horticulture is the agriculture virtually every American sees on a daily basis. Anyone that is purchasing plants or enjoying plants in a consumer landscape is a part of the industry. Consumer horticulture is immense, with plant materials serving as the living connector that integrates diverse businesses and players. Our customers purchase plants, pots, fertilizer, hardscapes, turf, and tree care products, landscape services, and designs. The list is almost endless, yet it is driven by plants purchased for their beauty, utility, and health consideration. These plant choices affect our health, well-being, and the environment in ways we understand and in ways that we do not. As you can see in this, what I will call a typical consumer horticulture landscape, we have a bunch of different aspects and too many to really name. You have pavers, you have turf, we have garden beds, even poolside and water use. But really, if we wanted to show you how consumer horticulture impacts climate change in all of these areas, there's no way we could possibly ever cover that in an hour or 2 hours even. That is a week-long seminar on how consumer horticulture impacts climate change. So for today's presentation, we've really wanted to narrow down on just one segment of consumer horticulture and how that consumer horticulture segment is a powerful driver in the economy and also integrates into how we can play a positive impact on climate change. And that area is trees. So we want to take a look at, in the consumer landscape, trees that are purchased by consumers or by and large for consumers. So this could be in a consumer given yard or in an area that is frequented or habited by consumers, whether that's a city streetscape or a botanical garden. This is not forestry in the classical sense, where we're talking about trees for the production of raw materials that go into lumber or farming such trees so that they produce a resource at their chop, right? This is about trees being that final product in the consumer landscape, to where maybe sure, we can count oxygen as that final product, but really these trees are meant to stand for a long time and be planted for consumers, by consumers, to affect their own health and their environment. The system is broad, and it spans from nurseries producing the right trees for consumers all the way to landscapers knowing which trees to put in, and for businesses and consumers allocating the necessary space for positive environmental change in their specific localities. This is national. This is also regional. It's local. It stems as big as you can imagine and also as small down to someone planting one tree in their yard, all has a role in consumer horticulture and how it affects the role that trees play in climate change and how consumer horticulture then in turn affects climate change on a large scale. And with that, I will turn it over to Janet Harton, who's going to be talking about enhancing tree canopies in disadvantaged communities. Take it away, Janet.
Thank you so much, Mason. It's a real honor to share some of our applied research and education within University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources related to the vital role that our urban trees play in mitigating the impacts of climate change in our cities. I'll share some of our results and some of our focus on identifying the hardiest of the hardy trees and the toughest of the toughest trees that we believe, based on their physiology and other factors, are able to head on take on the challenges of climate change between now and the turn of the century. I'll also talk about our focus regarding enhancing tree canopies in disadvantaged and marginalized communities, often through partnerships with the green industry, municipalities, and resource conservation districts, to, through shared governance, increase those canopies to at least 25% within the next 20 years. Our urban trees offer a wide variety of benefits. Well-maintained trees greatly magnify their ability to reduce the carbon footprint and more directly fight the impacts of climate change in their middle and later years of life, often their fifth, sixth, sometimes seventh decade. That's why it's so critical, it's so important that we provide that vital care that promotes healthy and long-lived trees. In California, we're entering yet another drought, and keeping our trees adequately watered during this dry period is a top priority, even with the scarce water resources that we have. Trees in their later years have a much larger biomass than they did when they were younger, so they're just much more adept at maximizing their shade potential, their ability to absorb greater concentrations of carbon dioxide. They can store greater amounts of carbon. They also have a more expansive branch and foliage structure that provides shelter and a home to a wide array of arthropods, birds, wildlife species. As trees age, they're also better equipped to filter out pollutants from water and air as well. Here's two examples of trees providing environmental benefits in our cities. The photo on the left shows a single but very well-placed tree shading vehicles and office buildings in Palm Springs, California, a particularly hot urban heat island with average temperatures reaching well into the hundreds during the summer. Shade provided by that single tree can reduce energy use and cost by both the vehicles and offices really significantly. Re-radiated heat off the asphalt parking lot can increase those summer parking lot temperatures to more than 130 degrees. The tree on the right provides a home to dozens of species of birds and wildlife, and it's preventing what could result in serious and permanent decreases otherwise in their populations. Lower tree canopies are often found in lower income disadvantaged neighborhoods. This particular example is in San Bernardino, California, very close to our cooperative extension office, as a matter of fact. The tree canopy is very low, 0 to 11%. The poverty rate is 99 percentile, and the rates of both asthma and cardiovascular incidents are also much higher than the statewide average. Also, there's a very high ozone level of 98 percentile. In contrast, these conditions found in Atherton, which is a city in the county of San Mateo, has high rates of affluence, lower rates of asthma and cardiovascular diseases, and, relative to California, also low rates of ozone pollution. Atherton is very known for its tree-lined streets, green spaces, and parks. So I realize these are stark differences, and I'm not trying to indicate that there's a cause and effect relationship, but leveling the playing field by at least concentrating on these most needy neighborhoods with the lowest tree canopies needs to be one of our priorities. I'm excited to share with you some information about some climate-ready landscape tree studies that are being conducted with United States Forest Service and University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources scientist. I'm involved at the UC Riverside location. It's in inland Southern California. We started it about 6 years ago, so the trees are going into their 6th year actually this fall. The first planting was up in Davis, which is a city in the Northern California area adjacent to Sacramento. Those trees are about a year older. And we also have a Southern California coastal location where we have a plot, and that's in Irvine in Orange County. It's important that today we start identifying trees and the attributes that these trees need to have to be able to make it during the harsher climates that are predicted, and that certainly by the turn of the century will be the norm. So we're measuring performance of a select species base on the heat and drought resistance. There are, of course, carbon sequestration, looking at trees that are enhanced over the average amount of carbon sequestration by the typical streetscape tree. We're also looking at the resistance to current and expected emerging pests. And I realize that's hard to predict, but we do have some models. And also their ability just to do all right in adverse soil and shade conditions that otherwise most trees wouldn't prefer. So in a nutshell, the objective of that study is to create a more resilient urban forest by, if necessary, shifting our palette of tree species to those proven to perform well when exposed to climate stressors such as heat, drought, switches in wind patterns, basically more tumultuous conditions, longer, drier periods, but also some flooding. As a lot of people in University of California say that are climatologists, get used to weirder weather. The first thing we did was take a very umbrella and broad step back, and at the more global level, across all of our studies, we looked at evaluations of climate trends and exposure. So we actually spent a lot of time studying the CalAdapt climate model. It was developed by University of California, Berkeley, and other scientists. It's based on various scenarios of predicted increases in carbon dioxide and other emissions from fossil fuels. And the model includes expected climate trends over the next 75 years related to temperature, wind patterns, shifts, solar radiation, and other climatological factors that we needed to use to seriously guide the selection of our study trees that we felt were best equipped to adapt to these harsh conditions. We also selected trees at the more local and more climate zone level based on a vulnerability model that included a component that's a cooperative project between the Urban Forest Ecosystem Institute and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo that includes an excellent searchable plant selection index that can help one further refine selections of suitable trees that maximize their ability to mitigate impacts of climate change in our case. So as you can see in this graph, there's soil moistures, there's drought tolerance, but emerging pests, and also making sure that we're not inviting invasive pests to be able to outcompete our native plants and other non-native but less invasive plants. The step that really was hitting a home run was when we got to the point of identifying the most promising species. I have to say, we made a really wise choice because we asked wholesale retail nursery professionals as well as certified arborists to weigh in on how they saw the trees performing. Another really critical point in these identification processes were to make sure that these selected species were rare, meaning that when we cross-referenced them, we wanted them to represent less than 1% of a typical Southern California tree canopy. There's myriad reasons for this, one of the biggest being that you certainly don't want too lean of culture or a monoculture, because that's just inviting trouble. If we're not so good at predicting what we think these emerging pests are and we miss one, then you could have an insect or disease wipe out much of a landscape that was well on its way to helping to provide these benefits to cool urban heat islands because one pest liked that specific species. So that was very important to us. For that reason, we also included non-invasive but climatically adapted non-natives to supplement the native database that we started with. Another study that I have separately from the Climate Ready Tree Study at Riverside is examining the impact of mulch on tree health and water requirements. This project is adjacent to an urban heat island, and our master gardeners are assisting in data collection, and they've been just wonderful. What we did was we took 4 species from the larger study and we replicated them. We applied 4-inch applications of organic wood chip mulch, and we're looking at the growth both at 6 inches and 3 feet above ground, and also their general health. We presented some early research results last August, and 3 of the 4 tree species are trending to perform better with the mulch treatment. The study isn't completed, and with the water off now for over a year in those plots, we're eager to continue to take the data through this summer under what likely will be conditions of drought. If anything, one of the species, which is the desert museum Palo Verde, it's trending, but not statistically significantly so yet, to really not have a preference for organic mulch, which makes sense based on its physiology. It's not particularly a large shade-producing tree, and it also doesn't produce much self-mulch, so that kind of adds credence to these findings. And an advantage of trees that are as drought-resistant as Palo Verde without needing mulch, especially the organic mulch, is to reduce the combustible products in fire-prone areas of California. So in that case, looking at trees that either don't particularly have a need or a desire for an organic mulch, or would do adequately with the inorganic or certainly less fire-prone or combustible products such as pea gravel, rocks, or decomposed granite. My colleague, Dr. Igor Lacan, is engaging with Dr. Joe McBride in some really interesting work as well. They're looking at the impact of climate change-induced temperature increases on the suitability of street tree species in California cities. Basically, they're also interested in long-term goals to both reduce the carbon footprint through the many benefits that our urban trees offer, but his team also recognized the urgency of planning today for trees that can withstand even harsher climate conditions tomorrow. His team determined that while our coastal tree palette already includes many heat and drought-tolerant trees, it's our inland valley and desert cities that are in trouble. They don't have enough tree species that are known to do well in warmer climates. In a way, it was a space for time substitution. He took cities and twinned them with cities that had the projected climate within the next few decades of the cooler climate zone species currently. The results do show that less than half of inland cities have tree species expected to adapt to climate change based on their current palettes. And residents of these cities, as well as the ecosystems, are the most vulnerable, and a shift in species needs to occur soon to maximize the benefits of these trees. As I indicated earlier, tree health and longevity are of utmost concern and importance to be able to have these trees actually live to the point where they're better able to sequester appreciable amounts of carbon dioxide and store appreciable amounts of carbon in their wood. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens over decades. So ensuring tree health and longevity is crucial to maximize the ability of our urban trees to help mitigate climate change. If further information is of interest, here's 2 recent review papers. One is on our CIMMYS and early weather station data and talking about how we did projections on minimum irrigation requirements of landscape trees that found that most trees are opportunistic, that they prefer to have about 80 or 90% of their evapotranspiration demands met by irrigation. but they'll do fine on 40 to 50% of that water. And in some cases, they actually perform better on about half or down to the quarter amount of that water because they have less incidence of root rots and crown rot, phytophthora types of diseases. The other paper is a review on UCANR's research and education influencing landscape water conservation and public policy. We partner with a wide array of external organizations to help ensure that our outreach regarding the importance of enhancing our tree canopies to that desired 25% level is met. We partner with the green industry, municipalities, resource conservation districts. They're all avid supporters of these efforts. Often it's the residents, however, of these underserved communities themselves who, either in their role as being a master gardener volunteer or as an advocate of city greening efforts, reach out for assistance. They're the real heart of these efforts. Trees for Tomorrow involves education as well as very applied research. It includes our climate ready landscape study. It includes a lot of outreach efforts. And in a nutshell, it's putting science into practice to enhance tree canopies, especially in these disadvantaged and needy communities. Here's 3 of the trees that are performing really well in our climate ready tree study, especially at the Riverside location. The red push pistache on the left and the Bubba Desert Willow on the right are both from our climate ready tree study. The middle tree I like a lot too. That's Quercus tomentella, the island oak, and it's also a contender. It's performing well. But we were able to gain access to a lot of trees, a lot of the red pistache and a lot of the Bubba Desert Willow, and they're in the ground now in our North Redlands Tree Enhancement Project. We have a strong outreach component in all of this work regarding meeting the people, making sure that those that visit, as Dr. Betty Richardson is here docenting at, our local parks and our local demonstration gardens, get to actually see these trees in the ground. They'll see what they'll look like 5, 10, 15 years out. March 8th, we conducted a Trees for Tomorrow Start Today workshop. It was to have been live last year, but due to COVID, we made some arrangements to have it via Zoom. And there was a silver lining because the attendance was quite good. We had over 300 attendees, and we stretched it from being solely for Southern California, green industry professionals, planners, community development directors, master gardeners, landscape architects. The purpose of it was to bring together across disciplines a wide band of those interested in looking into today what we need to do time-wise to ensure that the future is bright for our children. I think that the richness of this workshop was because most of it was spent in breakout rooms based on geography, but across disciplines where people could talk. And although the meeting ended at 3:00, the door was opened after that, and we're forming task forces across these disciplines. And people are starting to talk about, wow, if that wholesale nursery had only supplied that tree, I'm a retail nursery person, I would have been able to have it available when that consumer asked for it and had seen Janet Harton's slides about her project. It's a two-way street too. So through our work, our master gardeners are also sharing this information on how the trees are performing, which local nurseries have access to them. Landscape architects are working with planners. Landscape architects and planners are working with the city arborist. And it definitely is it's a long-range plan to make some differences that start today. We're addressing underserved communities, and this will definitely remain our priority. Some of the examples where the trees are in the ground are in cities that some people are surprised to hear that we have a need for. One of those cities is Redlands, California. As you can see, there's a wide variety of, quite frankly, wealth and poverty in this city. University of Redlands is there. Victorian homes are there. Poverty is also there. So you can see that this is an effort that's very broad. The Common Vision Coalition, California Climate Action Corps, ESRI, Inland Empire Resource Conservation District, University of Redlands, of course, University of California Master Gardeners are all in this, partnering together to help ensure that the residents are empowered to make differences now that will best represent the healthy and the enhanced lifestyle for tomorrow. We have a lot of future research needs, and they center on identifying tree species more specifically that maximize carbon sequestration and identifying these tree species that are most effective at removing pollutants. Also, and this is a really big one, I think, is identifying the minimum tree canopy densities that maximize cooling urban heat islands and energy conservation. One thing that we don't want to do in our urban tree canopies is have the same monoculture or the same single architecture style of a tree, particularly in those Palm Springs parking lots I showed you, where you don't want to have superheated parking lots where the heat can't escape at night. So different architecture of the trees and the shrubs can go a long way in helping to make sure that there's good air circulation and that hot air can breathe and exit that situation that otherwise is contributing actually more to the fact that our desert night times are just not cooling off like they used to. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to a robust conversation. We want to all hear more of your viewpoints about this work we're doing and your suggestions for moving forward. And with that, I'm really pleased to turn over the presentation to Natalie. Thank you so very much.
Hello, I'm Natalie. I'm very glad to be able to take this next portion of the presentation and talk about our Extension Master Garden Network and how we play a crucial role in taking the trees to the people. So the information delivery really hinges upon our consumer audience, right? Because those of us who come from a research background, we highly value the data and the research-based information. It's a crucial foundation, but the data itself does not make the decisions. Individual consumers make those decisions, and they play a very vital role in a lot of different areas. Consumers are important because those decisions are economically important when we think about the multi-billion-dollar horticulture industry, but they're also environmentally important. And so the aggregate of these decisions comes into play when we talk about trees, when we talk about water, when we talk about soil, when we talk about human health and well-being and sustainability and stewardship. And so every decision that consumers make, it impacts the industry. Janet talked a little bit about plant selection and how extension can play a crucial role in that feedback loop. But all of those decisions have those twin impacts. However, our human decision makers are also vast, diverse, they're diffuse. There are many across the country, and a huge percentage of our population, about 3/4, garden in some way, but even more than that, enjoy parks and urban green spaces. So it's a very high number of people that we need to reach to truly impact the decision-making process, and they are spread out in many ways across the country. So it takes a truly unique outreach mechanism to be able to reach consumer audiences that are that impactful, but also that diverse and vast. So what would our outreach system need to include? It would need to include a solid information base, right? Research-based information, but it would also need to include people that were motivated to deliver that information, that both cared about the research-based information, but also understood their audience and the people that they were delivering it for. That outreach system and reaching those consumers would need to involve people who approximate in the area, close enough to form a personal relationship. It would need to be nimble, versed in verbal or in-person communication skills, but also digital mechanisms, as well as a wide range of social media platforms. And reaching those consumers would require outreach to encompass many people. And so when we think about what that outreach system might look like, it could very well look like our Extension Master Gardener Network. And in fact, we heartily believe that it does, because Extension Master Gardeners are recruited and they are trained specifically to reach communities and consumers within those communities. They extend the reach of our extension systems, and they educate in a wide variety of horticulture fields in those local communities, cities, towns, rural and urban areas. And a crucial element of this volunteer training program is that it goes where our existing extension system cannot. A really practical example is in the top picture here. One of the gentlemen in the picture is our horticulture agent in Davidson County, which is the county that Nashville metro area largely resides in. And there's only one horticulture agent in Davidson County. He covers commercial, he covers consumer, and in many ways you might think, wow, that is an overwhelming job. This is our largest and fastest growing metro area in Tennessee. How could one horticulture agent truly meet the needs of that vast clientele? He certainly could do a much better job if he had 200 volunteers backing him up. And in fact, he does. So that is very much one of the practical roles that our extension volunteer program plays. I want to give you just a little bit of a picture of our volunteers, both the program that they are trained, but also the network and the volunteers themselves. They're educated and they are passionate. So it is an initial training program. And in many of these special areas, urban trees would be a very good example. There can be additional level of training that our volunteers go through. Here on the left, we have the tree stewards of Duval County, Florida, who are master gardeners that have gone through an additional training specifically focused on proper care and maintenance of urban trees. They're also passionate. And so the passion is displayed in rain or shine. And the picture on the right is actually a Master Gardener conference that took place at one of our arboretum in Middle Tennessee. Those are, in fact, Master Gardeners standing in the rain talking about trees. So we have passionate volunteers, but they're also trained in the crucial role of science communication for consumers. And so they know how these topics are meaningful to them, why they should care about trees, how that truly impacts our broader environment and climate. And they have that research-based foundation that helps them take that information and deliver it to their friends, to their neighbors, to their community in a way that they know is valuable, because that is the value and the use and the practical nature of that information to them. So they're educated, they're passionate, they're trained in science communication, but maybe the most important element of our Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Network is they are embedded and invested in the cities and communities in which they serve and they educate. Our volunteers are local. Our programs may be nationwide, but our volunteers are local. And so they know the people that they are reaching. They understand the culture. They understand the needs of the community, and they can deliver that information in a way that is climatically, geographically, whether it be rural or urban, socioeconomically useful and practical to the communities in which they serve. So that's a picture of the people. I also want to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the numbers that our Master Gardener program encompasses. Yearly average are about 86,000 volunteers who invest yearly 5.6 million hours in service and education in the area of horticulture in their cities and communities. Each year we train about 13,000 new Master Gardener volunteers. In 49 of the 50 land-grant universities operate a Extension Master Gardener program within their state. And that training encompasses about 1.5 million hours of training delivered annually, much for initial training, but also continuing education that continually takes place throughout the program. Those 86,000 volunteers throughout the country have a very vast network of contacts, and through a wide array of outreach means, about 50 million people are contacted annually by our Master Gardener volunteers nationwide. Those are some impressive numbers. 5.6 million hours, 50 million contacts. What do some of those projects really look? What does that very practically look like in our communities, and how does it connect with trees and with climate? Many of our Master Gardener programs invest in arboreta. They play a crucial outreach role, education role, and they really introduce to communities the trees that are prevalent, native to the area, but also perform well, understand growth and development, and of course, identification of those trees. We have arboreta in rural areas. This middle picture is actually Dyer County, Tennessee. So that's the northwest corner of the state, pretty rural row crop area. And after planting these trees, the irrigation didn't get installed by the park for a while, and buckets were involved. So there can be some really boots on the ground way that our Master Gardeners support arboreta in their communities. Pruning comes into play. These other pictures are from Lebanon, Tennessee, and Middle Tennessee. That's the Bedore Parkway Arboretum, where they trim using good practices, but also have some fun while doing it. I want to give you a little bit of a glimpse of some of the areas that urban forestry and tree stewardship come into play in the metro areas in Florida. So this is Duval County, Florida, and that is Jacksonville. So the Jacksonville, Florida area has 80,000 acres of parks. It is a huge urban park and green space system, and the urban forestry agent there has actually trained a team of Master Gardener volunteers, giving them additional training. There are about 60 volunteers, and they help support proper pruning, maintenance of these trees to enable them to reach the size that they provide the truly impactful environmental benefits that Janet was referencing earlier. So it's all about proper care, pruning, stewardship, education, but making sure that those trees remain in place to provide the value for the community that they have the potential to. We oftentimes also knit together some of those aspects of tree care, maintenance, and education with urban and residential landscapes. And so the extension program names vary throughout the country. It might be a Florida-friendly landscape or a Tennessee smart yard, but the foundation is the same, that sustainability practices benefit the individual, but they also benefit society and have an environmental and climatic impact. And so it can be in areas of soil and mulch, proper irrigation, so water stewardship, but also in some ways mitigating the effects of water. So for us in Tennessee, we have, of course, a humid climate, often high levels of rainfall. And what we're seeing recently is more variable rainfall patterns. So in many of our urbanizing areas, we're seeing times when urban stream syndrome comes into play. We have very flashy hydrology. And so working with residents to be able to capture more water on site in their properties so that it does not need to be handled by our urban stormwater system has very personal and practical, but also community and environmental benefits. And so rain gardens are a key piece of our Tennessee Smart Yards program. So that is our Extension Master Gardener volunteer program, taking the trees to the people and addressing climate change at the community level.
Hello, I'm Ellen Bowski, and I'm speaking to you today as the chair of the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. We are a consortium with members from industry, nonprofits, and academia, and we are united by a common mission of growing a healthy world through the art, science, and business of plants, gardens, and landscapes. Why? Because when done right, consumer horticulture is good for the environment. It is good for human health and well-being, and it is good for business. I live outside of Atlanta, which often calls itself the city in the forest. We pride ourselves on our tree canopy, yet you can watch it disappear over the last 30 years on Google Earth. And the city just gets hotter and hotter. What has to happen so that we can enjoy the benefits of consumer horticulture? Well, we need tight science. We need the right plant material, and we need smart husbandry of that material. These things can be identified and characterized by good science, by data. However, as Natalie pointed out, data does not change human actions. People change human actions. Consumer horticulture research must be combined with extensive educational outreach to have meaningful impact. In the case of ornamental trees, it must reach the nurseries that grow the material, the many consumers who purchase it, that includes households, businesses, and municipalities, and the service industries which maintain our trees throughout their life. In this sense, consumer horticulture is unique among ag sciences. We can rarely influence the fate of 1,000 acres by influencing a few key decision makers. The task is challenging, yet it grows ever more important as our cities and suburbs continue to grow and expand, and the markets for consumer hort goods and services continue to grow. We use the example of ornamental trees today to illustrate the huge contribution consumer horticulture makes to our environment. But ornamental trees are just a small slice of the many specialty crops that are typically handled by consumers and which continue to drive our economy long after purchase. We could have selected any plant in this landscape Mason initially presented to you, and we could talk about water quality and quantity issues, pollinator health, or even mental health. Consumer horticulture extends well beyond landscapes. We feel it can be an effective tool to address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and issues of nutritional security and assistance. We look forward to telling you more. Thank you.